On September 13th, Cole, Duke, and I set off on my favorite trip of the entire exchange semester. This was our Austria-Switzerland trip. I love this trip so much. Also, I know the timestamps are wrong. It says 3:14 a.m. That is completely wrong. They converted back to my Canadian hour when I came back to Toronto. So unfortunately, the timestamps are wrong. It's about 9 a.m. when we left. So don't worry about those. Just look at the date. So we started off our train trip from Koblenz, Germany to Salzburg, Austria. Now we're cheap, so we decided we were gonna take the slower, cheaper trains instead of the fast, ice trains. So this ended up being about over 10-hour trip to get to Salzburg, if I remember correctly. But luckily we arrived in Salzburg safe and sound. It was pitch black at night, so I really couldn't see how absolutely beautiful the city is. But we arrived at our hostel, and it was actually a really nice hostel. At the time I was like, it's so hot in here, it was burning hot. But in comparison to the other hostels that I stayed at, it was great. We were given 2 courtesy shots or whatever, and I remember giving Cole mine because I'm like, we're about to go to bed, now's not the time. But yeah, we got up in the morning and headed out the door. Yay! Sorry for the interruption. I really wanted you guys to hear the bells, but we headed up to Fortress Hohensalzburg. Sorry if I butchered that pronunciation. The view is so beautiful from the top of the castle. Unfortunately, we went in the morning when there was a fog and mist over the city, but it was still such a beautiful sight. I wish we got to see it without the overcast, but it was still absolutely lovely. I remember picking up the Sound of Music postcard on the way to the castle, and I'm so glad that I got to have a little piece of the Sound of Music since I know it was filmed in Salzburg, Austria.
Oh, I can't even get you to. Wait, yes I can. Yeah. Health insurance can't cover that. I didn't realize that the mountain is actually a very tall mountain. Play it again.
Way more hard.
After looking around the fortress, we headed to the catacombs. They were much smaller than we thought they would be, and luckily all the bones had been removed. I remember that vividly, being afraid of that, but it was still really eerie all the same. And then we left and headed to a couple churches nearby. After roaming around the churches for a bit, we headed out to this coffee shop that Duke really wanted to go to. It was this specific one in Austria, and I remember he got this €8 Oreo coffee, as far as I remember, and honestly, it looked really good. So if you love coffee, it's probably worth it. After we grabbed Duke's coffee, we headed out to have lunch. And what better place to have local cuisine than the local grocery store? So throughout our entire trip, I think we went to the grocery store to get our, breakfast, lunches, and dinners, just because it was so much cheaper and there was a lot of variety. So we had no problem just eating at the grocery stores and not at fancy restaurants to save our money for future trips.
Wow.
It's all part of a healthy diet.
Now, this is where it started to not go to plan. We didn't really have much of a plan anyway, but we stayed our first night in Salzburg. Our idea was we were going to go to Innsbruck, but we had not bought tickets to go to Innsbruck from Salzburg. And it ended up being way cheaper to go back to Munich, Germany, and then all the way back to Innsbruck. So that's exactly what we did. So it was a much longer trip than it should have been. We ended up going back to Germany and then back into Austria. But honestly, it was totally worth it because on the way back through Salzburg to Munich, I didn't see it the night before because it was so dark out, but it was such beautiful scenery. So I'm so glad we tracked back and then went, because I got to see all this beautiful scenery in the daytime. So that night we arrived at our Airbnb in Innsbruck and stayed the night. There isn't much footage on it because during this time I had such terrible jet lag from arriving in Germany that I couldn't sleep much over the 2 weeks that I had arrived there. So I went to the doctor about it and he gave me sleeping pills. So I was taking sleeping pills while we were on this trip, and before I went to bed and when I woke up, I was so groggy that I could barely function. So I also lose my glasses later in Switzerland because I was so groggy that I just forgot about them. This is the part of the trip that gets absolutely crazy, and here's a brief preview of why it's getting crazy.
Really crazy. Yeah. And I don't need when I have
This was the driver that we found that could take us from Austria to closer to the border of Switzerland. It was actually crazy. Like, the ride was insane. He was driving so fast, and it was in the Alps. And thank God for Duke, because he was talking to this man the entire time while Cole and I were kind of like just kids in the back. So shout out to Duke for that. But he was a crazy driver. The reason we found him is there weren't enough, like, there weren't any cheap trains from Innsbruck into where we wanted to go in Switzerland. Cole found this driver that could take us there, so he said, sure, let's do it. As much as I loved this man, he had such charisma and he talked so much, but I wish he would pay more attention to the road, because he literally like drove off the road, and Duke was the only one who could see it, and I was terrified because I could just feel us kind of going over the edge, and we're hundreds of feet up in the air in the Alps. If we go over that border, we are dead. But luckily, he was able to drop us off safely at one of the train stations in Austria in the middle of nowhere. But we managed to take that to the town in Switzerland where we wanted to go. And it was by Lake Constaz. I'm sorry if I say that wrong, in Romanshorn, if I remember correctly. But it was beautiful.
You trying?
I'm trying so hard. How do the Instagrammers do this?
Perfect.
He was in the basement when we walked past. Yeah, it is. Keep my dresses.
I'm showing these pictures just because I want you guys to know how absolutely clear this water was. It was so clear, easily the clearest water I've ever swam in. Luckily, we were able to take a swim that night. I think Duke had a video call, so it was just Cole and I heading out to like go swim in the lake. And nobody else was swimming, none of the locals were, so I kind of felt like a weird tourist, but it was so worth it. So yeah, we went to bed at a really cool hostel. And this was one of easily my favorites. We loved the owner. I left my glasses there because I was so dead on sleeping pills. And then we headed back home. And it was such a cool, fun experience. And I'm glad we're not dead. Now, this is about a week after our Austria-Switzerland trip. We decided we wanted to visit the cities around our city, so we first decided on Bonn since it was the closest. And this was also a redemption arc, since Duke, Cole, and I tried to go to Bonn the first time and got kicked off the train. So we're gonna try and do it again. Unfortunately, Duke couldn't come. I think the reason why was he was stuck doing group work with this incredibly intense group that he was with. So unfortunately, he couldn't do his redemption arc in Bonn, but I'm sure he visited there himself later. I'm not sure. Now, this was an incredibly cool day trip. We went with Nora and Melanie and stopped by Ludwig Beethoven's childhood home, which was really cool since I've always appreciated or had an appreciation for Beethoven. And then also stopped at the Haribo store, because I know that's the birthplace of Haribo as well. And it was huge and so fun. And we all got little goodie bags with lots of treats in them. And that finishes off our trip to Bonn. It was quite short, but the city is pretty small. So we got everything done we wanted to in a couple hours. But we moved on next week to our next weekend day trip to Dusseldorf. We got to do a lot of these day trips just because the rail system was so good in Germany. We were able to go a lot of places in a short amount of time. I will say, were the trains late very often? Absolutely. It stressed me out to no end. But is the rail system still so much better than it is in Canada? Absolutely. There's not even a question about it. So we used it to its full potential while we were in Germany. And here is the continuation of Cole and I's contemporary museum journey. We seem to go to a lot of these museums, considering we don't really enjoy them that much. At least at the start we didn't. But I think by the end we went to so many that I had this newfound respect for contemporary artists, and I really like contemporary museums now. I just didn't know a lot about it before I started going to them, and I didn't understand contemporary art at all. So try going to contemporary art museums. They're actually really cool. Then we got to go up in the sky in the Dusseldorf Museum. There was this giant net thing with beach balls, giant beach balls. That's all I can explain it as. And it was so cool. So after a long day of running around Dusseldorf, we got some souvenirs and then decided to head back. We took the train, just the regular trains. I think it took around 3 hours for us to get back to our town. And Dusseldorf overall is a great city. There's so much to do there. So if you're looking for things to do, I'd recommend it. Was it my favorite city out of the German cities that I visited? No, but it's still fun to visit if you have the time.